You can change yourself, but can you change the world? Can one person's choices ripple out and shift the structures that shape millions of lives? Tonight, 15 more philosophers who didn't just question reality. They rebuilt it, showing us that the systems we live inside, justice, society, morality itself, aren't fixed. They're choices we make together. And if understanding your mind helps you grow, feel free to subscribe. It's a simple way to keep learning together. Let's begin. Philosophy. Parmenides. Heraclitus said, "Everything flows, everything changes, nothing stays the same." Parmenides looked at the same world and said the opposite. Change is an illusion. Reality never moves. Two philosophers, same universe, completely opposite conclusions. Parmenides started with logic. Something cannot come from nothing. If something exists now, it must have always existed in some form. Real change would mean something appearing from nowhere or disappearing into nothing. But that's impossible. Therefore, what we call change is just appearance. Reality itself is one unchanging, eternal. Your senses tell you things move, grow, decay. You see the seasons shift. You watch people age. But Parmenides said your senses lie. They show you shadows and surface. Only reason reveals truth. And reason says true being cannot change because there's nowhere for it to change from or to. This sounds abstract until you realize we use this thinking constantly. Mathematics doesn't change. 2 + 2 equaled 4 a billion years ago and will equal 4 a billion years from now. Physical laws, the speed of light, the charge of an electron, these constants don't shift with trends or opinions. Scientists search for what stays the same beneath everything that appears to change. In your own life, think about core values. Circumstances change. Your job changes. Your body changes. But something in you remains. The principles you won't compromise. The lines you won't cross. That's your Parmenidean core, the part of you that doesn't flow. Companies fail when they forget this. They chase trends, pivot, constantly change strategy every quarter. But the ones that last have something unchanging at their center. A mission that doesn't shift. Values that aren't negotiable. Everything else can adapt, but the core stays solid. Parmenides forces an uncomfortable question. Beneath all the change you experience, what's actually permanent? Your personality shifts. Your beliefs evolve. Your relationships transform. But is there something that persists? Something that makes you still you after decades of change? Maybe he was wrong about the physical world. Things do change. Science proved that. But he was onto something about truth itself. Some things are true independent of time, place, or perspective. Logic doesn't care what year it is. Mathematical relationships don't evolve. Certain principles hold regardless of circumstances. The practical lesson isn't to deny change. It's to find what doesn't change. In a world that constantly shifts, what's your bedrock? What truth do you stand on when everything else is moving? Heraclitus taught you to flow. Parmenides teaches you what to hold on to while you're flowing. Under the surface of constant change, something eternal persists. The trick is finding it. Philosophy 2. Plato. Prisoners sit in a cave chained since birth facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns. Between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects. The prisoners see only shadows on the wall. They think the shadows are real. They name them, study them, build their entire understanding of reality from shadows. One prisoner breaks free. He turns around, Z's the fire sees the objects casting shadows. It hurts his eyes. He's confused. Everything he believed was wrong. Then he walks out of the cave entirely. Sunlight blinds him. Gradually, his eyes adjust. He sees trees, mountains, the sky. Real things, not shadows. He returns to tell the others. What you're seeing isn't real. It's just shadows. They think he's insane. They threaten him. If he tries to free them, they'll kill him. That's Plato's allegory. Most people live seeing shadows, thinking they're seeing reality. The actual forms, the true nature of things, exist in a realm beyond physical perception. Take the concept of a chair. You've seen thousands of chairs, different sizes, materials, designs. But somehow you recognize them all as chairs. Why? Because there's a perfect form of chairness that all physical chairs imperfect copy. The form isn't physical, it's an idea. But it's more real than any chair you can sit on because it's unchanging, perfect, eternal. This applies to everything. Justice, beauty, goodness. We debate what's just because we're looking at imperfect examples. But perfect justice exists as a form. We don't see it directly. We see shadows of it and argue about which shadow is most accurate. Plato believed learning isn't absorbing new information. It's remembering what your soul already knows. You recognize mathematical truths, not because someone taught you, but because you're remembering eternal principles your soul encountered before birth. Education is recollection. Apply this to your work. When you design something, you're not creating from nothing. You're trying to approximate an ideal form. The best design already exists in a perfect state. Your job is getting as close to it as possible. Every iteration is trying to see past the shadow to the thing casting it. Or think about justice in law. No legal system is perfect. Every law has exceptions, loopholes, unintended consequences. But we keep trying because we sense perfect justice exists. We're reaching for a form we can't quite grasp, but know is there. The lesson isn't to reject physical reality. It's to recognize that what you see is surface. Behind appearances, there's essence. Most people spend their lives studying shadows on cave walls. Plato's challenge is to turn around, face the light, and see what's actually casting the shadows. It's uncomfortable. It hurts. People might think you're crazy, but once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And you can't stay satisfied with shadows anymore. Philosophy 3. Aristotle. Plato said, "Look up to the heavens for truth." Aristotle, his student, said, "I'm going to look around here." That shift changed everything. From that disagreement, empirical science was born. Aristotle wanted to understand how things actually work in this world, not some perfect realm beyond it. He observed, catalogued, analyzed. He dissected animals, studied politics, examined logic, explored ethics. Everything was fair game for investigation. His big contribution was the 4 causes. To truly understand something, you need to know 4 things. What it's made of, the material cause. What form it takes, the formal cause. What made it, the efficient cause. And critically, what it's for the final cause. Purpose matters. A wooden table is made of wood shaped as a flat surface, with legs built by a carpenter designed to hold things. Each answer reveals something essential. Without purpose, you haven't fully explained it. He applied this thinking everywhere, including to human life. What's the purpose of being human? What are we? For his answer was eudaimonia, usually translated as happiness, but better understood as flourishing, living well, actualizing your potential, but how do you flourish through virtue? And virtue isn't found at extremes. It's the golden mean, the sweet spot between opposite vices. Courage isn't fearlessness or recklessness. It's the balance between cowardice and foolhardiness. You feel fear but act anyway when it's right to act. Generosity sits between stinginess and wastefulness. You give when appropriate in appropriate amounts. Confidence balances between self-deprecation and arrogance. Every virtue is a midpoint, and finding it requires judgment, practice, wisdom. This is intensely practical. Think about work-life balance. Too much work, you burn out. Too much leisure, you stagnate. The virtue is somewhere in between, and it's different for each person. You have to find your own golden mean. Or consider parenting. Too strict, you crush the child's spirit. Too permissive, they lack structure. The wise parent finds the middle path, providing guidance without suffocation, freedom without abandonment. Aristotle rejected extremes in all things. The ascetic who renounces pleasure and the hedonist who chases it are both missing the point. The virtue is enjoying pleasure appropriately in the right amount at the right time for the right reasons. This isn't about compromise or mediocrity. The golden mean isn't lukewarm. It's precise. It's hitting the target exactly. An archer doesn't aim between two trees. They aim at the bullseye. Virtue is precision, not settling for average. Flourishing comes from hitting that precise point repeatedly. One virtuous act doesn't make you virtuous any more than one healthy meal makes you healthy. You become virtuous through practice, through habitually finding the mean until it becomes your nature. The practical lesson is to mistrust extremes. When you're pulled toward opposite poles, the answer usually lives between them, not at the lukewarm middle, but at the exact point of balance. Find it. Practice it. That's where wisdom lives. Philosophy for Epicureans today. Epicurean means someone who indulges in fine food and expensive pleasures, lavish dinners, rare wines, luxury. But Epicurus, the founder of this philosophy, lived on bread and water. He owned almost nothing. He avoided public life and lived simply with friends. So who got it wrong? Epicurus defined pleasure differently than most people. True pleasure isn't excitement or stimulation. It's the absence of pain and anxiety. Not the high of getting what you want, but the peace of not being disturbed. The goal isn't to maximize good feelings. It's to minimize suffering. He divided desires into three categories. First, natural and necessary. Food when hungry, water when thirsty, shelter from weather. These are legitimate needs. Satisfy them. Second, natural but unnecessary. Fancy food. Sexual pleasure, entertainment. These are fine in moderation, but not essential. Third, unnatural and unnecessary. Fame, wealth, power. These create endless suffering because they can never be satisfied. There's always someone richer, more famous, more powerful. The path to happiness is simple. Focus on Category 1. Enjoy Category 2 carefully. Avoid Category 3 entirely. Most suffering comes from chasing things you don't actually need. You think a bigger house will make you happy, but then you need to fill it, maintain it, worry about it. The pleasure is brief, the burden lasts. Consider a fancy restaurant meal. It tastes amazing for an hour. Then comes the bill. Then comes the guilt about calories. Then comes the digestive discomfort. The net pleasure might actually be negative. But a simple meal with good friends, no anxiety, no aftermath that provides lasting satisfaction. Or think about possessions. Each thing you own creates a maintenance burden. You have to clean it, store it, protect it, eventually replace it. The brief pleasure of acquisition turns into an ongoing drain. But friendship, conversation, peace of mind, these provide pleasure without the burden. Epicurus and his followers created a garden community. They lived simply, shared meals, discussed philosophy, enjoyed each other's company. No striving for status, no accumulation of wealth, just the basics plus genuine connection. They claimed this was the highest form of pleasure available to humans. The modern world pushes the opposite message. More is better. Luxury equals happiness. Status brings satisfaction. But Epicurus saw through it. Those pleasures are intense but short. They create new anxieties. They're never enough. The hedonic treadmill keeps spinning. Real pleasure is sustainable. It doesn't require increasing doses. A walk with a friend provides the same satisfaction every time. A simple meal satisfies as much today as yesterday. Peace of mind doesn't diminish with use. The lesson isn't to renounce everything. It's to distinguish between pleasures that sustain you and pleasures that drain you. Choose sustainability. Less becomes more when you're no longer maintaining the burden of excess. Philosophy. Confucius' China was tearing itself apart. 5 centuries of warfare, states conquering states, rulers betraying rulers, violence everywhere. Confucius looked at the chaos and said, "The problem isn't political, it's moral. You can't fix society with better policies if the people implementing them are corrupt. You can't create peace with better strategies if no one values honor." The solution starts with individual character, then ripples outward. Confucius identified 5 fundamental relationships: parent and child, ruler and subject, husband and wife, older and younger, friend and friend. Society works when each relationship operates properly. When they break down, everything breaks down. At the heart of his teaching were 2 concepts: Li, often translated as ritual or propriety, and Ren, translated as humaneness or benevolence. Li means knowing your role and playing it well. It's not just ceremonies. It's treating people appropriately based on your relationship to them. Respecting elders, supporting younger, being loyal to friends. Each relationship has its own form. Ren is treating others with genuine care, not just following rules mechanically, but acting from real warmth and empathy. Li without Ren becomes empty ritual. Ren without Li becomes vague sentimentality. Together, they create social harmony. The key was example. You can't command people to be good. You inspire them by being good yourself. A leader who practices integrity creates a culture of integrity. A parent who shows respect teaches respect. People follow the pattern you set far more than the rules you announce. Think about company culture today. You can write value statements all day. If leadership doesn't embody them, nobody cares. But when leaders consistently demonstrate the values, when they hold themselves to the same standards they expect from others, the culture becomes real. That's Li and Ren in modern form. Or consider parenting. Telling children to be honest while you lie teaches them that words don't matter. But living with integrity, even when it's costly, teaches them what integrity actually means. They learn from what you do, not what you say. Confucius believed in working from the inside out. Fix yourself before trying to fix your family. Get your family right before trying to fix your community. Master your community before trying to influence the nation. Too many people want to reform society while their own life is chaos. Start where you have control. This isn't about accepting bad systems. It's about understanding that lasting change comes from character, not from policy alone. A society of selfish people will corrupt any political system, but people of genuine virtue can make almost any system work. The practical lesson is simple but hard. Want to improve the world? Start with yourself. Want better leadership? Be a better leader. Want more respect? Show more respect. Social harmony begins with individual cultivation. Everything else follows from there. Philosophy 6. Mahayana Buddhism. Early Buddhism focused on individual liberation, escape suffering, reach enlightenment, save yourself. Then Mahayana Buddhism said something radical. I'll wait. I'm not going anywhere until everyone else gets there too. This shift changed everything. The ideal became the bodhisattva, someone who achieves enlightenment but delays entering nirvana. Why? To stay behind and help others. Personal liberation isn't enough if others are still suffering. True freedom means bringing everyone along. At the core is a concept called sunyata, emptiness. Not that nothing exists, but that nothing exists independently. Everything depends on everything else. A tree needs soil, sun, rain, air. The soil needs decomposition, organisms, minerals. Each thing is connected to all things. There's no isolated self. You're a node in an infinite web of relationships. This has profound implications. If you're connected to everyone, then their suffering is your suffering. Their freedom is your freedom. You can't be truly liberated while others remain trapped. It's not about charity or obligation. It's about recognizing that the boundaries between self and other are illusion. Think about leadership. A manager who gets promoted and forgets their team didn't really succeed. Their success came from the team. If the team suffers while they rise, they've broken the connection. But a leader who lifts everyone, who sees their success as inseparable from collective success, that's bodhisattva leadership, or parenting. Your child's success isn't separate from yours. You're not competing with them or living through them. You're interconnected. When they flourish, you flourish. When they struggle, you struggle. Not because you're codependent, but because you're genuinely linked. Mahayana challenges the Western obsession with individual achievement. The self-made man is a myth. You didn't build anything alone. Your success depended on teachers, parents, society, infrastructure opportunities that others didn't have. Recognizing that doesn't diminish your effort. It places it in context. Compassion becomes central, not as a nice addition, but as a logical consequence. If we're all interconnected, then helping you helps me. Not in a transactional way, but fundamentally. Your pain is my pain, because the boundary between us is artificial. This extends globally. Climate change affects everyone. Economic systems connect across borders. Pandemics don't respect nations. The illusion that you can be safe while others suffer is crumbling. Mahayana saw this truth centuries ago. We're all in this together, whether we acknowledge it or not. The Bodhisattva vow is beautiful and demanding. I will not enter final peace until all beings are free. It sounds impossible. How can you wait for everyone? But that's the point. The work never ends. Liberation isn't a destination you reach and leave behind. It's a commitment to the ongoing process of reducing suffering wherever you find it. No one is free until everyone is free. That's not political rhetoric. It's a description of reality. We're connected. Your liberation and mine are not separate achievements. Philosophy 7. Spinoza. Someone asks Spinoza, "Where is God?" He points at the ground. "Right here, you're standing on God." For this answer, his Jewish community excommunicated him. He was 23. Baruch Spinoza proposed something radical for the 17th century. God and nature are the same thing. Not that God created nature and then left. Not that God watches from above. God is nature. Nature is God. One substance, two names. This wasn't atheism. Spinoza believed in God completely. He just refused to separate the divine from the physical world. Everything that exists is part of one infinite substance expressing itself in infinite ways. The tree outside your window is God. The rock on the ground is God. You are God. Not in a mystical sense, but literally. All existence is one unified whole. This means studying nature is studying God. Science becomes a spiritual practice. Understanding physics is understanding divine law. When you learn how cells divide or how gravity works, you're learning how God operates. The sacred isn't somewhere else. It's here now in everything observable. Most religions place God outside the world, separate transcendent watching from a distance. Spinoza collapsed that distance to zero. There is no outside. There is no gap between creator and creation. Everything is one seamless reality expressing itself. This has practical implications. If nature is divine, then destroying nature is destroying God. Environmental damage isn't just bad policy, it's desecration. When you pollute a river, you're not just harming an ecosystem, you're harming the divine substance that you're also part of. The separation between spiritual and material dissolves. You can't pursue spiritual truth while ignoring physical reality. They're the same thing. Prayer and scientific inquiry aren't opposites. They're both ways of engaging with the one reality that is everything. Spinoza believed everything happens necessarily. Not that you lack free will, but that everything follows from the nature of God/nature. Cause and effect aren't random. They're the logical unfolding of reality according to its own nature. Understanding this brings peace. You stop fighting what is and start aligning with it. This also means there's no cosmic punishment or reward, no God judging you from heaven. The consequences of your actions are natural, not supernatural. If you act destructively, you suffer because you're acting against your own nature, against the whole of which you're a part. The lesson is simple, but profound. Stop looking for the sacred somewhere else. It's not in a distant heaven or a special building. It's in the dirt under your feet. It's in the air you breathe. It's in the laws of physics and the beating of your heart. Spirituality isn't about transcending the world. It's about recognizing that the world itself is divine. Science and religion aren't enemies. They're both tools for understanding the one reality that we're all part of. Everything is holy because everything is God expressing itself. The sacred is immediate physical observable, right here, right now. Philosophy 8. Kant. Someone asks Immanuel Kant, if a murderer comes to your door asking where your friend is hiding, and you know where they are, should you lie? Most people answer immediately. Of course, lie to save your friend. Kant's answer, no, never lie, not even then. This sounds insane until you understand his reasoning. Kant believed in categorical imperatives, rules that apply universally without exception. His test was simple. Act only according to principles you could will to be universal law. If everyone did what you're doing, would the world still function? Take lying. If lying became universal, if everyone lied whenever it was convenient? What happens? Trust collapses. Language becomes meaningless. Society can't function. Therefore, lying is always wrong, even to save a life. The consequence doesn't justify breaking a universal principle. This feels harsh. But Kant wasn't being cruel. He was pointing at something deeper. If you allow exceptions, if you say lying is wrong, except when, then you haven't established a moral law. You've established a suggestion, and suggestions don't guide behavior when pressure hits. His second principle was equally absolute. Treat people as ends in themselves, never merely as means. Don't use people, even for good purposes, even to help others. Using someone as a tool, regardless of your intentions, violates their dignity as an autonomous being. Think about this at work. A manager who manipulates employees toward a goal, even a good goal like company success, is treating them as means. The ethical manager respects each person's autonomy, explains the goal, and lets them choose whether to pursue it. Or consider relationships. Using someone for emotional support without caring about their well-being treats them as a tool. Even if they don't mind, even if it seems to work, you're violating a fundamental principle. People aren't instruments for your purposes. Kant's ethics feel rigid because they are. That's the point. Flexible morality isn't morality. It's convenience disguised as ethics. If your principles bend whenever following them is difficult, they're not principles, they're preferences. But here's the practical wisdom. Small lies erode trust systems. Just this once becomes a habit. The exception becomes the rule. Maintaining absolute honesty, even when it costs you, builds a reputation that can't be bought. People know where you stand. Your word becomes currency. The same applies to treating people as ends. When you consistently respect people's autonomy, never manipulating or using them, you build relationships based on genuine respect. It's harder in the short term, but the long-term rewards are immeasurable. Kant asks you to think about what kind of world you're creating with each action. If everyone did what you're doing right now, would that world be livable? If not, you're acting immorally regardless of your intentions or the immediate consequences. Principles matter more than outcomes. Not because outcomes don't matter, but because without principles, you have no compass when outcomes are unclear. Philosophy. 9. Hegel. Mark Twain supposedly said, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." Hegel went further. History has a formula, a pattern that drives everything forward. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel saw history as a process with logic, not random events but a structured development. He called it the dialectic. It works in 3 steps. Thesis, something exists. Antithesis, its opposite emerges. Synthesis. The conflict between them creates something new that includes elements of both. Then the synthesis becomes the new thesis, and the process repeats. Progress comes through opposition and resolution. Not smooth evolution, but through contradiction and conflict, creating new understanding. Think about a startup. You launch with a vision, the thesis. You hit reality. Customer don't want what you thought they wanted. That's the antithesis. You don't abandon everything or ignore feedback. You synthesize. You pivot. The new version incorporates your original vision and the lessons from failure. That synthesis becomes your new thesis until the next challenge, or marriage. Two people come together, each with their own way of doing things. Conflict is inevitable. Different approaches to money, parenting, career, leisure. Those aren't problems to avoid. They're the engine of growth. Through working through differences, you don't just compromise. You create a new synthesis, a shared approach that's better than either person's original position. Hegel believed this process drives all of history. Each era produces its opposite, and from the tension comes a new era. Not progress in a straight line, but progress through conflict. You can't skip the conflict. The antithesis is necessary. Without opposition, there's no movement. This changes how you view obstacles. That opposing force isn't just in your way, it's essential to your development. The thesis alone is incomplete. It needs its opposite to evolve. Struggle isn't a detour from progress. It is progress. Consider personal growth. You have an idea about who you are. Life presents evidence to the contrary. That's painful. But that conflict between self-image and reality creates the opportunity for a deeper, more accurate self-understanding. The synthesis that emerges is closer to truth than the thesis was. Hegel's insight is that contradiction isn't the end, it's the beginning. When two ideas clash, when systems collide, when your plan hits reality, that's not failure. That's the dialectical process working. The question isn't how to avoid conflict, it's what synthesis will emerge from it. This applies everywhere. Political systems generate opposition movements. Scientific theories generate competing theories. The conflict refines understanding. Truth emerges not from one perspective winning, but from perspectives colliding and creating something new. The practical lesson is to stop seeing opposition as purely negative. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's frustrating when your thesis meets its antithesis. But that tension is how new understanding emerges. Embrace the conflict. Work through it. The synthesis waiting on the other side contains more truth than either side alone. Philosophy 10. Marx. Karl Marx looked at philosophers discussing ideas and said, "You've interpreted the world. The point is to change it." Marx believed history isn't driven by ideas or great leaders. It's driven by material conditions, specifically by who controls the means of production. The factories, the land, the tools, the capital. Whoever owns these shapes society. Everything else, culture, law, even ideas, follows from economic structure. He divided society into two basic classes: the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, the proletariat, who sell their labor to survive. The relationship between them is inherently exploitative. Workers create value. Owners extract that value as profit. The worker makes a product worth $100. They're paid $20. The owner keeps $80. Marx called this surplus value, and he argued it's theft dressed up as business. This creates alienation. Workers don't own what they produce. They have no say in how they work. They're disconnected from the product, from the process, from their own humanity. You spend 8 hours making something that belongs to someone else, following instructions. You didn't design, creating profit you don't share. Over time, you forget you're a creative being. You become a tool. Marx predicted this system would collapse. As wealth concentrates, as the gap between owners and workers grows, eventually the workers would organize revolt and create a system where they collectively own the means of production. No more exploitation, no more alienation, just people working for themselves. He was right about many things, and wrong about others. Capitalism didn't collapse the way he predicted, but he identified real dynamics. Look at the gig economy, drivers for rideshare apps, delivery workers for food apps. They own nothing. The platform owns everything. They're just labor, more alienated than factory workers because they don't even have co-workers or job security. Or consider passion economy rhetoric. Do what you love and you'll never work a day. Sounds nice, but often it means work endless hours for little pay because you should be grateful to do what you love. It's exploitation wrapped in inspirational language. Marx forces uncomfortable questions. Who's benefiting from your labor? If you're creating value, who's capturing it? The company's shareholders, or you? How much say do you have in your work? Are you building something you believe in, or just executing someone else's vision for their profit? The broader point stands. Economic structures shape everything else. How society organizes production determines culture, politics, relationships. If you want to understand why things are the way they are, don't just look at ideas or leaders. Look at who owns what. Follow the money. That's where power actually lives. You don't have to accept Marx's solutions to recognize he identified real problems. Alienation is real. Exploitation exists. And economic structures do shape society far more than most people acknowledge. Understanding that is the first step to changing it. Philosophy 10. Marx. Karl Marx looked at philosophers discussing ideas and said, "You've interpreted the world. The point is to change it." Marx believed history isn't driven by ideas or great leaders. It's driven by material conditions, specifically by who controls the means of production. The factories, the land, the tools, the capital. Whoever owns these shapes society. Everything else, culture, law, even ideas, follows from economic structure. He divided society into two basic classes: the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, the proletariat, who sell their labor to survive. The relationship between them is inherently exploitative. Workers create value. Owners extract that value as profit. The worker makes a product worth $100. They're paid $20. The owner keeps $80. Marx called this surplus value, and he argued it's theft dressed up as business. This creates alienation. Workers don't own what they produce. They have no say in how they work. They're disconnected from the product, from the process, from their own humanity. You spend 8 hours making something that belongs to someone else, following instructions. You didn't design, creating profit you don't share. Over time, you forget you're a creative being. You become a tool. Marx predicted this system would collapse. As wealth concentrates, as the gap between owners and workers grows, eventually the workers would organize revolt and create a system where they collectively own the means of production. No more exploitation, no more alienation, just people working for themselves. He was right about many things and wrong about others. Capitalism didn't collapse the way he predicted, but he identified real dynamics. Look at the gig economy, drivers for rideshare apps, delivery workers for food apps. They own nothing. The platform owns everything. They're just labor, more alienated than factory workers because they don't even have co-workers or job security. Or consider passion economy rhetoric. Do what you love and you'll never work a day. Sounds nice, but often it means work endless hours for little pay because you should be grateful to do what you love. It's exploitation wrapped in inspirational language. Marx forces uncomfortable questions. Who's benefiting from your labor? If you're creating value, who's capturing it? The company's shareholders, or you? How much say do you have in your work? Are you building something you believe in, or just executing someone else's vision for their profit? The broader point stands. Economic structures shape everything else. How society organizes production determines culture, politics, relationships. If you want to understand why things are the way they are, don't just look at ideas or leaders. Look at who owns what. Follow the money. That's where power actually lives. You don't have to accept Marx's solutions to recognize he identified real problems. Alienation is real. Exploitation exists. And economic structures do shape society far more than most people acknowledge. Understanding that is the first step to changing it. Philosophy 11. Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer looked at life and saw a pattern. Life swings between suffering and boredom. When you want something you don't have, you suffer. When you get what you want, you're briefly satisfied, then bored. Then you want something else. The cycle never ends. He believed a blind force drives everything. He called it will. Not conscious choice, but an unconscious, insatiable drive pushing all existence forward. Animals are driven to survive and reproduce. Humans are driven to achieve, acquire, accomplish. But the will is never satisfied. There's no end point, no final goal where you rest content. This creates built-in suffering. Desire itself is painful. You lack something, so you ache for it. Then you get it, and the ache returns for something else. The hedonic treadmill, as modern psychology calls it. No matter what you achieve, you return to baseline happiness. Schopenhauer saw this 2 centuries before scientists proved it. But he wasn't counseling suicide. He offered temporary escapes. Art was his main solution. When you're absorbed in music or beauty or contemplation, the will quiets. You stop wanting. You exist in pure perception, no striving, no desire. It doesn't last. The will returns. But those moments of aesthetic experience offer relief. He also admired ascetic lifestyles. People who turned away from worldly pursuits to find peace through simplicity and self-discipline. Not because they were morally superior, but because they'd found a way to quiet the endless wanting. Think about your own experience. You wanted the job. You got it. Brief satisfaction, then stress about the next promotion. You wanted the house. You got it. Brief joy, then maintenance and mortgage anxiety. You wanted the relationship. You got it. Brief happiness, then different problems. Nothing ever delivers lasting satisfaction. This isn't pessimism. It's realism. Recognizing the pattern lets you stop expecting permanent happiness from achievements. The promotion won't complete you. The purchase won't fulfill you. The goal won't satisfy you. Not because you're broken, but because satisfaction isn't how the system works. But you can find temporary refuge, music that pulls you out of time, nature that silences the internal chatter, art that absorbs you completely, meditation that creates space between you and wanting. These aren't solutions, they're respites, brief pauses in the endless cycle of desire. Schopenhauer's gift was honesty. He didn't promise happiness, he didn't offer false hope. He said suffering is built into existence. But he also showed that understanding this truth and finding moments of escape makes the burden lighter. You stop expecting life to deliver what it can't. And in those aesthetic moments when desire goes quiet, you taste something beyond the will's endless grinding. the struggle doesn't end. But knowing it's struggle and finding ways to rest, that's as close to peace as we get. Philosophy. 12. Freud. You chose your spouse. But did you notice they have similar mannerisms to your mother? Same tone of voice. Similar way of expressing disapproval. That's not coincidence. That's your unconscious mind, making choices you think are yours. Sigmund Freud proposed something uncomfortable. You're not in control. Most of your behavior is driven by forces you can't see, housed in the unconscious mind. You think you're making rational decisions, but underneath hidden processes are actually steering. He divided the mind into 3 parts. The id, pure instinct. Hunger, aggression, sexual drive the raw animal wants. The superego, internalized moral rules. What your parents taught you, what society demands the voice of should. And between them, the ego. The part trying to navigate reality, balance the id's demands with the superego's restrictions. Most of the interesting stuff happens below awareness. The unconscious stores everything you've repressed. Traumatic memories, forbidden desires, thoughts you can't consciously accept. You push them down, but they don't disappear. They influence you from below the surface. Dreams were Freud's way in. He called them the royal road to the unconscious. While you sleep, the ego relaxes its guard. The unconscious expresses itself in symbols and stories. That bizarre dream about being late to an exam, 30 years after finishing school. Your unconscious working through anxiety. Freudian slips are another window. You meant to say one thing, but something else came out. That's not random. That's the unconscious speaking. The word you accidentally used reveals what you're actually thinking underneath the socially acceptable surface. Apply this to your life. You're angry at your boss. But really, the intensity of that anger comes from unresolved feelings about your father. The boss triggered something deeper. That's why you react so strongly to criticism from authority figures, but handle peer criticism fine. Or you keep choosing partners who aren't available. Consciously, you want commitment, but unconsciously, you're avoiding real intimacy. Because childhood experiences taught you intimacy means pain. You're sabotaging yourself without realizing it. Freud's insight was that your behavior has reasons you don't know. When you do something that doesn't make sense, when you react disproportionately, when you sabotage your own goals, there's an unconscious reason. Not an excuse, but an explanation. Modern psychology has moved beyond many of Freud's specific claims, but his core insight remains. The unconscious exists. It influences you, and understanding those hidden forces helps you gain some control over them. You can't access the unconscious directly, but you can notice patterns. When do you overreact? What situations trigger disproportionate responses? What choices do you keep making despite knowing better? Those patterns are clues to what's happening beneath awareness. The uncomfortable truth is you're less in control than you think. But recognizing that, paradoxically, gives you more control. You can't change what you don't see. Freud taught us to look deeper. Philosophy. 13. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir made a statement that still echoes. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Gender isn't biological destiny. It's social construction. Performance, something you do not, something you are. She argued that throughout history, man has been considered the default human, the subject, the self. Woman has been defined as the other, the deviation, the secondary. Not human plus something, but human minus. Everything about femininity, she claimed, is taught, enforced, performed. Little girls aren't naturally passive emotional, focused on appearance. They're trained through toys, through praise for being pretty rather than smart, through messages about what's appropriate. Boys don't cry and girls should be nice aren't biological facts. They're cultural programming. The same applies to perceived limitations. Women can't lead. Not biological truth-learned behavior. Women are taught not to be assertive. Then, when they aren't assertive, people point and say, "See, women aren't natural leaders." It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. De Beauvoir's central insight was that essence isn't given. It's created. You're not born with a fixed female or male nature. Society hands you a script based on anatomy. Your job, according to cultural norms, is to perform that script convincingly. Be feminine. Be masculine. Stay in your lane. Liberation means recognizing the script is just that, a script. You can reject it, rewrite it, perform something different. The boundaries aren't natural. They're maintained through repetition and enforcement. Think about phrases like "be a man" or "act like a lady." What do those actually mean? They're demands to perform a specific set of behaviors that culture has deemed appropriate. They have nothing to do with biology and everything to do with social control. This extends beyond gender. Anytime someone tells you, "People like you don't do that," they're trying to enforce a constructed boundary. Working class people don't become artists. Men don't show vulnerability. Women don't prioritize career. These aren't facts. They're social scripts designed to keep people in predetermined roles. De Beauvoir connected this to Sartre's existentialism. Existence precedes essence. You're not born with a nature that determines who you should be. You create yourself through choices. Gender roles are one more false essence people mistake for destiny. The practical application is simple but revolutionary. Every time you think, "I'm just not that kind of person," or "people like me don't do that," question it. Is that biological truth or learned limitation? Did nature make that rule, or did culture? Most boundaries are performance. Most limitations are taught. Most essences are constructed. Recognizing that doesn't mean biology doesn't matter. It means biology doesn't determine nearly as much as we've been told. The roles you play aren't destiny. They're choices you can unmake. Your essence isn't fixed. You create it. That's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Philosophy. 14. Peter Singer. You're walking past a pond. You see a child drowning. Saving them means ruining your $200 shoes and being late for work. Do you save them? Of course. Everyone says yes immediately. Now change the scenario. A child in a developing country will die from a preventable disease. Donating $200 will save them. Do you donate? Most people hesitate. Many say no. Peter Singer asks, what's the moral difference? In both cases, you can save a life for roughly the same cost. Distance doesn't change the moral weight. The child you can't see is just as real, just as valuable as the one in front of you. Singer argues that traditional ethics has an arbitrary boundary problem. We extend moral consideration to people near us, family, friends, neighbors, fellow citizens. But suffering doesn't stop at national borders. A child dying in Africa matters just as much as a child dying in your city. Their distance from you doesn't reduce their value. This extends to animals. Factory farming causes immense suffering. Billions of animals live in conditions that would be illegal to impose on dogs or cats. They feel pain. They have basic awareness. Singer argues their suffering counts. Not equally with human suffering, perhaps, but it counts. The ability to suffer, not the ability to reason or speak, is what matters morally. Most people's ethical thinking follows concentric circles. Care deeply about immediate family, less about extended family, even less about neighbors, barely at all about distant strangers, nothing about animals used for food. Singer challenges this. Why should proximity determine moral weight? Think about your daily choices. $5 coffee or $5 donation to buy malaria nets that save lives? The coffee gives you 10 minutes of pleasure. The donation saves an actual human being from dying. But people choose the coffee without guilt because the person dying is far away and abstract. Singer isn't saying you're a monster. He's saying our moral intuitions evolved for small tribes. They don't scale well to modern interconnected civilization. We need to expand our circle of ethical consideration deliberately through reason, because instinct won't do it. He advocates for effective giving. If you're wealthy by global standards, which most people reading this are, you should give significantly. Not because you're obligated to sacrifice everything, but because the marginal value of your dollars is much higher helping others than buying luxuries for yourself. This applies to career choices too. Some careers do vastly more good than others. Medicine saves lives directly. Finance makes you rich, but helps fewer people. Singer argues you should consider effectiveness. Earn money in finance if that's your strength, then donate large portions to effective charities. That might save more lives than becoming a doctor. The core insight is uncomfortable. Morality doesn't stop at the edge of your vision. The suffering you can't see still matters. And once you know you could help, choosing not to becomes a moral choice. Word count 450. Philosophy 15. Effective altruism. You have $100 to donate. Option A saves one person's life. You'll meet them, see their face, hear their story. Option B saves 100 people's lives. You'll never meet them, never see proof, just statistics. Which do you choose? Most people choose option A, the identifiable victim, the person with a face. But effective altruism says that's wrong. 99 people died because you prioritized your emotional connection over their lives. Effective altruism asks a simple question. If you want to do good, shouldn't you do the most good possible? Not what feels good, not what looks good. What actually produces the best outcomes when measured objectively? This means using evidence and reason. Which interventions save the most lives per dollar? Which problems are neglected, meaning your contribution matters more? Which issues are tractable, meaning progress is actually possible? Focus your resources there. Malaria nets in sub-Saharan Africa cost a few dollars each and save lives. That's incredibly cost-effective. A local charity gala might make you feel good and look generous, but it's vastly less efficient. The feel-good charity isn't wrong. It's just not optimal. And when lives are at stake, optimal matters. This extends to career choice. Some careers do far more good than others. Becoming a doctor helps people directly, but a talented person in finance could earn huge amounts, donate most of it, and fund the equivalent of dozens of doctors' careers. It's not glamorous, but it might be more effective. The movement also looks at scale. Climate change, artificial intelligence, safety, pandemic prevention. These are huge problems affecting millions or billions. Local issues matter, but effective altruism argues you should consider scope. Would you rather save one person you can see or prevent suffering for thousands you can't? Critics say this is cold, reducing people to numbers, ignoring relationships and local community. But effective altruism responds. Your warm feelings about helping your neighbor don't make suffering elsewhere less real. The child dying from malaria doesn't care that you felt good about your donation choice. The core insight is brutal but necessary. Good intentions don't equal good outcomes. You have to measure impact. A charity that spends 90% on overhead helps far fewer people than one spending 10% on overhead. Feeling generous doesn't matter. Results matter. This challenges comfortable assumptions. Maybe the charity you've supported for years isn't actually effective. Maybe the career path you chose helps fewer people than alternatives. Maybe the volunteer work you do feels meaningful, but produces minimal results compared to what you could do differently. Effective altruism isn't saying don't help. It's saying help effectively. Use your resources, time and money where they do the most good, not where they make you feel best, not where they're most visible. Where they save the most lives, prevent the most suffering, create the most benefit. Good intentions aren't enough. Measure your impact, then optimize it.